Welcome to episode 162. And in this episode, I'm going to be discussing employee engagement strategies, and more importantly, the ones that will actually work in a small or growing business. Now, employee engagement can sound like one of those corporate terms that gets thrown around a lot. It can sound a bit fluffy, a bit removed from the day-to-day reality of running a business. But when you strip it back, it really just comes down to this. Do your people feel connected to their work? Are they clear on what matters? Are they valued for what they do? And are they motivated to contribute? Because when that happens, that's when you have employee engagement, and you will feel it everywhere in your business. You will see it in performance, customer service, how people communicate, how they solve problems, and of course, whether your employees stay. And when your engagement is low, you're going to feel that too. People will do the bare minimum, whatever they need to do to, get the job done, but no more. Their energy drops, standards slip. Good people start to go elsewhere, and suddenly you're dealing with turnover, frustration, and a team that just feels a bit flat. So today I would like to talk about practical engagement strategies that small and medium businesses can actually use. So not expensive programs, not gimmicks, just real things that you can do to improve employee engagement, lift motivation, and build a stronger culture over time. So starting with why this matters. The employee engagement matters because it shows up in the results. It's not just about people feeling good at work. Gallup's latest data shows that only 21% of employees are engaged at work, and globally it's only 20%. And that number has not shifted a lot for many years. So there's clearly a lot of room for improvement. And that matters because engaged employees tend to be more productive, safer at work, and less likely to be off sick. They also tend to do better work. So if your team feels flat, disconnected, or unclear, it's not just a culture issue, it's going to show up in performance too. So employee engagement is about creating the conditions where people can do their best work and they want to keep doing it with you. And if you think about that statistic, if only 20% of employees in Australia are engaged, if you can have that 20% in your business, you are going to be much more competitive in the market. And you're going to see that in the conditions in your workplace as well. An engaged team is more likely to care about outcomes. They're going to support each other, speak up when something goes wrong, go the extra mile when it matters. It doesn't mean people need to work long hours or sacrifice their well-being, but they're invested because they understand the bigger picture of the organization. They feel a part of it. And especially for small businesses, this matters a lot because you don't have layers of management or endless resources. Every single person has a real impact. So one highly engaged, really productive team member can actually lift the whole business. Conversely, one disengaged person can have the opposite effect. So the good news is that improving employee engagement doesn't necessarily need a bigger budget. What it does need is intention. So when we talk about effective employee engagement strategies, what are they? And the first one is clarity. People can't feel engaged if they're confused. If your team is not clear on what the business is trying to achieve, what success looks like, or how their role contributes, it's pretty hard to stay motivated. Most people want to do a good job, but they do need that context and direction, and they need to know where to focus. So this is why one of the simplest and most effective things you can do is talk regularly about where the business is headed and what matters right now. And this could be in team meetings, one-on-ones, quarterly planning sessions. You don't need to get overly formal, but you do need to get consistent. So sharing the priorities, explaining the why behind decisions, letting people know what's going well, what's changing, what the challenges are, and what it means for them. Because if your people feel in the loop, they're going to feel trusted. And when we feel trusted, engagement grows. The second strategy is recognition, and this can be one of the most underestimated employee motivation techniques. And I'm not talking about big awards nights or expensive perks. It's just really making sure people know that their effort is seen and appreciated. So in a lot of businesses, people mostly hear feedback when something's gone wrong. And, over time, that just wears people down. It creates a culture where silence feels like, well, that means I'm doing a good job. So recognition works best when it's specific and timely. So instead of saying, hey, great job, instead say, hey, thank you for the way that you handled that client issue. I really appreciate that you stayed calm, you communicated clearly, and that made a huge difference. So suddenly this tells the person exactly what they did well and why it mattered. And that kind of recognition builds confidence. It reinforces the behaviors you want more of, and it also helps to connect everyday actions back to your values and standards. And it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be a shout out in a team meeting, it can be a quick message to someone on Teams or Slack, it can be just a simple thank you in that moment. But it just needs to be genuine. People can tell the difference between real appreciation and something that's forced. The third strategy is communication and feedback. And this is a big one because engagement is not something that you can create with posters on a wall or a yearly employee engagement survey. It is built in conversations. It's built in whether people feel safe to speak up. When they do their managers listen? Does feedback go both ways? A lot of business owners are really good at telling people what needs to happen. Fewer are equally good at creating the space to hear what the team is seeing, feeling, and experiencing. And that matters because your people know where the pain points are before you do. They know when the processes aren't working properly. They know when customers are frustrated, when workloads are unrealistic, where communication is breaking down. So if you want to improve employee engagement, you need to ask better questions. So ask them, what's helping you to do your best work? What's getting in the way? What's frustrating right now? What do you need more of? What should you stop doing, start doing, keep doing? And then we want to actually act on what we hear. We don't need to fix everything, but if we ask for feedback and then nothing changes, people will stop speaking up. And that's when engagement starts to slide. So those small visible actions really do build trust, which can be just fixing one process, adjusting a meeting rhythm, clarifying priorities, addressing a behavioral issue. What matters is that your team see that their input led to something. The fourth strategy is development and growth. And one of the fastest ways to lose good people is when they feel stuck. And growth doesn't necessarily mean promotion. In a small business, there may not be a promotional role waiting. And that's okay, but people want to learn, they want to build their skills, stretch themselves, feel like they're moving forward. And this is where development becomes a really important part of your employee engagement strategy. It can be formal, like training or courses, but it can also be simple and low cost. It could be mentoring, cross training, giving someone a project to lead, involving them in a new area of the business, or asking them to present an idea to the team. It could even be a regular conversation about what do they want to get better at and how can you support that. When people feel like you're invested in their growth, they are much more likely to stay with you. It sends a message that they matter beyond just the job. The fifth strategy is building a positive workplace culture. And I don't mean culture in the vague sense where everyone says we have a great culture because they have free coffees or birthday cakes. A positive culture is really about how people experience work every day. It is how they feel that they are treated. It is what behaviors are accepted, whether there is trust, whether they're included. Do your leaders say and do the things that they say they're going to do? Is the environment respectful and supportive and clear? Culture has a direct impact on engagement because people don't just engage with tasks, they're engaging with that whole environment around them. So if our culture is full of mixed messages, poor communication, unclear expectations, then engagement is hard to sustain. On the other hand, if people feel safe and respected and connected, that gives us a much stronger foundation. And for small businesses, this often comes back to basics. So being clear on our values, using them in real decisions, not just on the website, addressing poor behaviour early, making onboarding thoughtful, helping new people feel welcome, celebrating wins, noticing effort, creating opportunities for connection, especially if your team works remotely or across different locations. We know that belonging really matters. People want to feel like part of something, not that they're just completing tasks in isolation. Another practical strategy that often gets forgotten about is just giving people autonomy. It's one of the strongest drivers of motivation. People don't want to be micromanaged. They want clarity about the outcome, but the freedom in how they will get there. So, when we trust people with the responsibility and involve them in decisions that affect their work, we create ownership. And that ownership and autonomy lifts engagement. And of course, that doesn't mean we don't have any structure. We still have structure in the business, but we have really clear expectations, support when it's needed, and room for people to use their judgment. And there's a balance there that really matters. If we try and keep too much control, we're going to kill motivation. If we have too little, then suddenly people feel directionless and they're uncertain. So, as good leaders, we need to find that balance in the middle. Now, a question that often comes up is, well, how do you measure employee engagement? And this is important because it's hard to improve something if we don't understand where we started from. And we don't need a huge system to do this. For most small businesses, there are a few simple methods. You can run an annual survey if your team is large enough. So we would say you want to have at least 10 people to do that. Or you can do shorter pulse surveys through the year. They don't need to be long. Shorter is often better. But we're asking about their whole employee experience, things like communication, recognition, workload, leadership, development. And you can also ask them, well, do they recommend you as a good place to work? Another option is to use stay interviews. So instead of waiting until someone resigns and then asking why with an exit conversation, a stay interview is a conversation while they're still with you to say, okay, well, why do you stay? What do you enjoy? What might cause you to leave? What would make your work better? These conversations can uncover really useful insights early. And then there are the signals that you're probably already seeing in the business. So, things like employee turnover, sick leave, the energy in meetings starting to drop, participation in development, referrals. Do people speak up with ideas? Are managers having quality one-on-ones? All of these things will tell you something about engagement. And the key is not just collecting the information, but closing the loop. So we want to share with everyone, this is what we're hearing. Here are our 2 or 3 priorities. And then we take action and we let people know what's changing because it's the follow through where trust is built. Another common question I get is whether HR support can increase team engagement. And the answer is yes, but maybe not in the same way that people assume, because HR doesn't create employee engagement. Engagement lives in those day-to-day experiences that employees have with their leaders, with your business systems, and your culture. But HR can absolutely help to create the structure, the tools, and the capability that make engagement more likely. And that could be designing a better onboarding experience, helping managers to know how to give and receive feedback, setting up regular check ins, improving role clarity, supporting development plans, running surveys, or helping businesses deal with psychosocial risks like high workload, poor communication, or unresolved conflict. So, in other words, HR can help turn engagement from a vague idea into something practical and consistent. And that's exactly the sort of work that we do with clients through our Accelerate project. We use our Find, Grow, Keep methodology to help businesses put the right people and culture foundations in place so engagement isn't left to chance. It becomes just a part of how that business runs day to day. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, it all sounds good, I don't have time to overhaul everything, you do not need to do everything at once. And actually, you just shouldn't. So pick 1 or 2 areas and start there. So maybe you tighten up your one-on-one so they happen regularly and they include real feedback, not just task updates. Maybe you focus on recognition and make sure your leaders are noticing and naming good work more often. Maybe you ask your team 2 simple questions this month. What's helping you do your best work? What's getting in the way? Maybe you look at development and identify one growth opportunity for each person in your team. It's these small actions done consistently that make a huge difference over time. Employee engagement is not built through one big initiative, it is through all of those small moments, through clarity, trust, conversations, follow through, people just feeling like they matter. And when we get that right, the flow-on effect is huge. The research tells us this over and over again. We're going to keep our great people for longer. They're going to perform better, and we're going to have a business that feels better to lead as well. If you've received value from this episode, I would love it if you could leave a rating or a review over at Apple Podcasts or Spotify so someone else can also find the episodes to help with their business. Episodes are released on Mondays, so click subscribe and you'll be notified of when that's available. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any feedback, questions, or ideas for future episodes, head on over to amplifyhr.com.au or connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation.